Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now I've done contrast German infantry before, and a couple of others besides, but British infantry for the European campaign has taken me a little while to figure out because the Battledress colour is so specific. How can you do it with contrast or speed paint? Well, luckily I think I've finally cracked it, and if you like the look of what I've got spinning around in front of me now, I'm going to show you how. Luckily, it only takes a few paints. It's actually really quite economical, so bonus. As always, all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below. It is a lightning fast method, so let's get started. So as always, once your miniatures are assembled, you're going to want to prime them. Now here I've used Brain Matter Beige from the Army Painter, although you could just as easily use something like Wraith Bone, or even Skeleton Bone, and maybe dry brush a white or Wraith Bone or something similar over the top. What's important is that you choose something with a little bit of warmth in it rather than using a pure white, because if you do use a white, we're going to get quite some washed out and very pale colors, whereas Brain Matter Beige or Wraithbone will give us a little bit of warmth underneath and really help to sell the look of the uniform. So I'm going to start by painting in his skin. For this, I'm going to use Guilliman Flesh. You can pick anything that you like here, of course. If you prefer one of the Army Painter colors, maybe Dark Earth Flesh from Citadel, doesn't matter too much. Just pick the one you like and pop a layer of it over his skin. Now while that dries, I'm going to talk quickly about the mix that we're going to make up for the Battledress. Now Brownish Decay, interestingly enough, by itself is actually perfect for Canadian troops. You can just use it straight from the pot. It says yellowish brown. It really is a strong yellowish, slightly greenish brown, perfect for Canadians, but a little bit too green for our British troops. We want a little bit more warmth. We don't want to lose the green entirely. It all gets a bit fussy, let's say. British uniform is a funny one. So we are going to mix up equal parts of Brownish Decay, Ochre Clay, and Fire Drake. Now, if you want, you can play with the proportions on these a little bit. If you want a more faded brown, like Mediterranean era uniform, which has been out in the sun for a while, don't include the Ochre Clay. You can also include just a little bit less Ochre Clay if you want a slightly more, American War Aid, the browner uniforms that were out there. Have a play around with this, but equal parts of these three are nice and simple because of these dropper bottles. Now, just like with any other miniature, when you're painting with this stuff, you want to try and stick to an area at a time. So I'm going to start with his trousers and use a relatively large brush here and work around one leg, then the second, trying to avoid his gaiters and what have you as we go. Now, I am going to swap to a slightly smaller brush when I start doing his chest and what have you. But just for applying it, keep your brush moving in the same direction as often as you can. This is going to look pretty vile going on, if I'm honest. But once it dries, as with most of these one and done style paints, it is going to look much more reasonable. So keep the faith. Anywhere that it pulls maybe a little too much, you can shift it around with your brush. But for now, I'm just going to jam this on. And there it is. What I think so far is the closest I've managed to get British Battledress out of a one and done, so a contrast or speed paint or what have you, and it works. However, I'm pretty messy when applying it. So what I've got is some Brain Matter Beige from the pot. And for straps and what have you for his webbing, I'm going to quickly tidy up those little splots. If you were looking to blast through an army of these guys as quickly as possible, you might skip this stage, but I would suggest it's not going to take very long, especially considering how much time you're going to save overall if you are going to just contrast these guys. So I'm going to tidy them up. Give me a couple of seconds here. And then we can get on to actually painting the webbing. Now for this, I'm going to use Militarum Green, although you could use something like Algae Green from the Army Painter. I prefer Militarum Green because it is more of a slightly muted, very army man green, so it works perfectly for our British webbing of the late war period. I'm going to do the bits on his straps off screen. so I don't have the camera in the way while I'm trying to concentrate. Now for any wooden details, I quite like using snakebite leather. Particularly when it comes to painting the rifle, just go straight over top of everything, the metal bits as well, just avoiding his hands and the strap. Nice and quick this. Now while that dries, we can spin him around. There are a couple of other details to go to. With brownish decay, we're not mixing it with anything this time, I'm going to paint in his blanket. And then with some fire drake, I'm going to paint in his water bottle. Now I'm really just going with what looks about right here. In truth, this should probably be a slightly darker felt sort of brown, but fire drake is going to work just fine. We're not too worried about these little details. Now for any khaki straps, what I have here is bony matter from Army Painter. This will also work quite well if you are looking to do something like the cotton, what do you call them, bandoliers? Anything, you don't need to worry too much about the color. Just a generic faded sort of khaki color, this will work fine. And don't forget, across the top of his helmet, don't miss those little details too. You can be quite messy with this bit. Now we're already coming near the end point, to be perfectly honest. That's how fast this is. What I have is Black Legion, and we're going to use this to paint in, funnily enough, all of the black details. Now, if you want, you can use, Black Templar or Grim Black from the Army Painter onto the boots. If you do want a little bit more visual contrast, because Black Legion covers very, very well. It's almost like using a traditional acrylic. Which is the reason why I'm using it in this case, because I want it to cover like a normal black paint would for most of these details. Now this next part you could theoretically do with a contrast color or some speed paint, but I like a more solid finish to my metallic stuff. So what I'm going to use here, this is Castellan Green, and I'm going to paint his helmet, and anything like piats or grenades and what have you, anything which would be green painted metal. Give it a couple of coats of this, and it will look much better. Now what I've mixed up is 2 parts Igrax Earthshade to 3 parts Lamy and Medium. I would recommend, if you are going to shade this fella at this point, that thinning out the shade is a good idea. I don't really want to change the color all that much. I just want to dull down some of the recesses. This will help a little with that kind of cartoony finish that you get with your contrast and speed paint. And it will also hide any gaps that you've got between your layers. So I'm going to avoid his skin with this, actually. I'm just going to go over the uniform, his helmet, his weapon, and so on. But his hands and face I'll try and avoid. And then as a final touch, what I've got here is Iron Warriors from Citadel. Any dark gunmetal color will do the job though. Just a few little blips along the top of the metalwork on his rifle. And I'm also going to paint in the bayonet in its entirety. In reality, this will probably be a little bit shinier, actually, the bayonet in particular. But I think this is quite enough to make this look a little bit more interesting. Once I'm done here, what I'm going to do is to varnish them. It's important when you're using these one-coat paints that you do varnish them, because they're not quite as durable as your typical acrylics. From then I'm going to base them, and the recipe for that will be in the description. So, let's get a look at our speed-painted British infantryman once he is all finished. Now very quickly, as I was dry brushing his base, I slipped a little on his trousers and decided that I actually quite liked how it was turning out. So one extra step that I am doing, which you might not decide you need, it's up to you when you get your miniatures in front of you, but I have here Tyrant Skull. And I am very, very lightly just dry brushing along the edges of both his uniform and his webbing, because the green will actually take a little bit of a yellow highlight very, very well. So you want next to nothing on your brush as you're doing this. It's a good idea to scrub most of it off onto the base as you are dry brushing that. But once you're confident you're leaving next to nothing behind, you can go ahead and brighten up some of the high parts of the uniform, and that will look quite cool. And so, there at last, our speed-painted infantryman is complete. Now, honestly, This took about a quarter of the time it would ordinarily take me to even speed paint, using quick methods, my regular British infantry. So if that is a finish which you'd be happy to put on the table, I think, wow, that is definitely a lot quicker. Personally, I still find it a little bit more satisfying to spend that fraction more time using your regular acrylics, shade, dry brushing, all that sort of thing. But this end result, man, I'll tell you what, an army of this guy on the table would not look too bad. I reckon, especially if you are just getting started or you're a little bit anxious about painting your own troops, this you can't go wrong. As well, having to slow down and really take your time is going to help you with your brush control because you want to try and avoid making a mess as you go. So yeah, there's a lot actually selling it to me, to be perfectly honest. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Your support is invaluable, folks. Without your help, this channel would not be going, and I would be out of British infantry by now. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.